Coming up on Frontiers, what today's Iditarod team owes to the dogs of yesteryear.
There were things that happened back then that will never happen again.
45 years ago, they wondered whether a musher could take a team 1,000 miles.
Fast is not necessarily good. Endurance is a whole lot better.
Ahead, the great mushing experiment continues, how the dogs and the race evolved together.
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by your local Alaska Toyota dealers. Toyota, let's go places. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers. With challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come. Bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program as we look back to an old frontier when the Iditarod was just a dream. Dan Seavey was one of the mushers 45 years ago who helped make the race a reality. Back then, he had no idea he would break trail for two future champions, his son Mitch and his grandson Dallas. The success of champions like Dallas Seavey and his father Mitch go back at least a half century, maybe longer, when you consider the ancestors of these dogs.
That dog, I love him because the more you look at him, the wiser he looks. Come on, I'm going to show you.
Dan Seavey doesn't know who this dog is, but somehow he speaks to him.
He's the icon for animal wisdom.
Animal wisdom, especially important in the early days of the Iditarod.
I can distinctly remember Rick Mackey questioning himself in front of me, I guess, about the wisdom of even going on that first race. And I said, Dick, look at it this way. There'll never be another first. I mean, there could be 1,000 more, but there'll never be another first. And that's where history starts. And we called him the silver-tongued fox. That was Joe Reddington. He could talk his grandmother out of her false teeth, I'll bet you.
You might say Joe Reddington was dogged in his determination. In his book, The First Great Race, Dan tells the story of how Reddington hadn't yet raised money for the purse, even as mushers took off for Nome. He had to borrow money from Dan Seavey's third-place prize to pay the winner. But Dan says he has no regrets.
We were just so darn thrilled just to cover the distance with the dog team.
But the adventure quickly turned into a race to innovate, especially when it came to the dogs, who are nothing like we see today.
The dogs are better, they're faster. Look at the musher, they're a lot more experience. Essentially, that first race, we were all pioneers.
The first Iditarod dogs were recruited from the trap line, tough, built to haul freight.
Fast is not necessarily good. Endurance is a whole lot better in the Iditarod. I mean, that's been proven.
So what are we talking about with a sprint speed?
Oh boy, 20 miles an hour.
A speed that can't be maintained over 1,000 miles. But in 1973, George Atla, a world champion sprint musher, learned the hard way.
He's the king of the sprinters. There's no question about that. So he entered the first race, finished fourth. It was not a good trip for those dogs.
Good dog.
Today's teams average about 10 miles an hour. In the first Iditarod, it took Seavey almost 21 days to finish third. The winners today have cut that time by more than half.
And the big problem for the front teams, for the real competitive teams, is to keep those dogs slowed down.
Is your team basically a cross between the George Atla dog and the endurance dog? Instead, the lineage for Seavey dogs harkens back to a breed known as Seppala Siberians, after Leonard Seppala, one of the greatest dog drivers of all time, known best for the 1925 Serum Run to Nome.
And he developed this line of Siberians that were much bigger than the normal Siberians, much leggier, and That's the kind of dog that he ran. And these Siberians would go back to the great Alaska sweepstake races of the early 1900s.
So what do you think the Seppala line contributed to your stock?
Oh, heavens. I think certainty, for one thing. By that I mean you were fairly certain when you bred with one of those dogs that you were going to probably have an improvement.
Haven't you, over the years, worked with a dog and said, I've seen that before?
Oh, obviously, yes.
Which ones?
I have one dog out here now who's my oldest leader. He's almost identical in looks and probably a stereotype for the Seppala Siberian.
Identical to Genghis, often pronounced Genghis, Seavey's first leader.
He was a very forgiving dog in that he was the one that I made all my mistakes with as far as training. This is Breeze. Yeah, he's a very affectionate dog. He more so than Genghis was.
Breeze looks so much like his old leader that Seavey sometimes slips up and calls him Genghis.
Yeah, you're my guy. You're my guy. He's almost like on cruise control when you drive him.
Some of Breeze's offspring are named after native mushers like Herbie, for Herbie Nayukpuk, and Bobby, for Bobby Vent. He says they would take this as a compliment. So what did you learn from Herbie?
Oh gosh, simplicity.
Seavey says native mushers inspired him to be more efficient, and with each race there were new innovations.
People don't think of things like a headlight. That in a way revolutionized the race. The race never sleeps.
Dan and Shirley Seavey have been a part of that revolution. From the start of a dog yard dynasty to a family tradition of winning. The Seaveys have dominated the last 5 years of the race.
Hey, girls.
The family motto, take care of the dogs, and the dogs will take care of you. Up next, 45 years of change in dog care and nutrition. Why one of the first women on the Iditarod Trail and a longtime race veteran say it's made all the difference.
Would you be into doing a hot stone massage?
What? At least the car is quiet.
Snowboarding is better than skiing.
I completely disagree.
The One for Everyone sales event is going on now, and we have one for you.
During Toyota's One for Everyone sales event, you can get 0% APR financing on the adventurous RAV4 and 10 other select models. Offer ends April 3rd. For great deals on other Toyotas, visit Toyota.com. Toyota, let's go places.
We are providers. We are artists. We are many things, but drugs do not define us. It's a fact. 85% of Alaska Native and American Indian people don't use illegal drugs. For more resources on building a healthy life, visit anthc.org/weare.
Somewhere in Alaska's wild, Allie Zirkle is leading the way toward ending domestic violence affecting Alaska's kids.
These kids are heroes. They're trying to improve themselves so they can go back and improve their communities.
Today, Allie and Lead On are helping to make that possible. Help end domestic violence, spread respect, build friendships, and strengthen communities. Visit andvsa.org.
Everyone can make a difference.
Okay, people, you know the drill.
Well, sometimes you gotta give and not receive. Sometimes you gotta live what you believe, open your eyes, 'cause that's where it starts. Right here with you and with me.
Generosity, pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
A race of a different kind is on.
How many kids here plan to run the Iditarod? Can we count?
A group called the Old Iditarod Gang wants to get a history book about the Iditarod's first 10 years into every Alaska school. They've started a GoFundMe campaign, and so far, books have been sent to about 300 schools. Another 200 are needed.
We gave this school a book a couple years ago. they use it constantly.
Here at the Northern Lights ABC School, the Iditarod has been woven into lessons about geography, English composition, Alaska history, and even math. Well, our next guests have contributed to that book, Iditarod, the First 10 Years, and joining us now, Donna Gentry-Massey, one of the first female mushers, along with Dr. Phil Meyer, a longtime Iditarod veteran. Now, this book has been a great way to bring back memories of the race. It's hard to believe it's been 45 years now since it started. What, Donna, do you think was the spirit of the Iditarod? Did it coincide with statehood?
Oh, definitely. You know, statehood wasn't that far out. The accomplishments of the oil pipeline, it was a very heady time in the state. And when Joe came up, was a perfect... Joe Reddington. It was the perfect time for him to be able to sell that to us. And to find the people to do the logistics, not just the mushers, but the logistics people behind the race for the food supplies and the volunteers. It was an incredible time.
And let's show a picture of you and your team, because you were one of the first mushers. And this is an interesting picture because, of course, it doesn't get your lead dog in there, Pup.
No, it doesn't. And she was the spirit. We do have some of Pup-Pup's pups in that picture, though. And Pup-Pup was, in my mind, the epitome of an Iditarod dog in a lot of ways, as far as her spirit, her ability to analyze and assess situations as they came up on the trail and make those instant little adjustments that go so into the team.
Well, we also have a photo of you, Dr. Meyer, out in the field with a team. Can you tell us what we're seeing here?
That's just a team bedded down, and those are the books that we use today. Each musher has one of those, and everything that we find with the dogs is marked down and kept track of in that little book.
Well, you have so many dogs that you deal with in the course of a race. What kind of a sense do you get in the evolution of these dogs?
The evolution, the dogs are inside. They're kind of the same dogs. They have physically improved, so they're probably better race dogs than they were. The dogs in the old days were good dogs. All mushers think that.
Well, we have some footage of some of the dogs from the dogs of yesteryear, and they're quite different. You know, I don't think on this year's race you would see any dogs like that.
Not many. They're a little heavier coated. They're a little stockier than the dogs that are racing. The freight dogs tend to be more that way. And I think the dogs that carried the mail, like Sepla's dogs, tend to be more racing or leaner or more like what we see today.
Well, Donna, did you see these dogs when you were out on the trail?
We saw some of everything, and from that has evolved the physical characteristics of the dog that we see today. But those dogs and the dogs we see today all had that same internal, I call them vagabonds, the excitement of wanting the adventure, of seeing what's over the next hill and around the next bend, and that incredible drive and the ability to bond with the rest of the team and with their musher. They're incredible animals.
Well, we have a map of today's race, and of course this one is a little different than past ones because it starts out in Fairbanks, but 1,000 miles, if you think that the race is 45 years, that's 45,000 miles, Iditarod miles so far. What is different about these miles over the years?
Equipment, gear, infrastructure support. The first race had one veterinarian and one airplane. Look at what they have now, Phil.
How many veterinarians do they have now?
There's a little more than 50, I think, that are all involved on the list. There was, I think, 54.
So what is it like to get all these veterinarians from all over the country?
Actually, there's a lot of different perspectives looking at it. You get a lot of different opinions on how things should be. And veterinarians in general have the same sense of dogs. There's specific sled dog things, but veterinarians in general understand dogs very well.
Well, there's been a lot of research into the Iditarod dogs. Has that helped dogs overall?
The specific one is Dr. Mac Davis has worked with ulcers, and he came up that how much of a problem ulcers actually are, and how much a treatment for it, and that spreads to other things, and how we deal with ulcers and think about them.
Well, one of the things, I hate to say it because it's always sad when you hear this news, but on Thursday we had a dog death. Seth Barnes had a dog, a 2-year-old die. And I guess we'll have to wait for a necropsy to find out why. But, you know, with all this emphasis in dog care, why do these deaths still happen?
Well, Mother Nature doesn't allow for the absence of death, so it happens. And I don't think there's any way to get around it. Of the people that it bothers, the vets out there probably are more concerned about that than anybody, with the possible exception of the mushers themselves.
Well, one of the things that people wonder about now is that the race keeps getting shorter and shorter for the winners. You know, we may someday reach the threshold of 8 days. So doesn't that put pressure on today's dogs, this drive to set a new record?
The race in itself, anytime you run a race, be it to grade school kids, there's pressure. And it's the musher's responsibility to not put too much pressure, and it's the vet's responsibility to help them in that.
But isn't that amazing, though, that you know, some mushers took a month in the first Iditarods to finish, and now we're seeing people come in at 9, 10, 11, 12 days.
Well, that's partially because of the innovation and the improvement in the dog breeding, but also the overall support of the race. When you look at the trails and the sled infrastructure and other inventions or improvements along the race that is enabling that speed.
I've heard that straw has been one of the best innovations. Something simple like that?
Straw is, the dogs rest much better if they can curl up in a bed of straw and sleep. They wake up feeling better and run better. I think one of the biggest things that speeded it up is the trails. In today's race, I doubt that any musher will break out their snowshoes and break trail. And that wasn't uncommon in the 70s.
So what's your favorite memory from those early days?
Going over the top of Topcock Hill and breaking over right at sunset onto the Bering Sea coast to the most incredible sunset you have ever seen. And just myself and the little dog team feeling so insignificant in such a great spot.
You have any memories from the trail?
In '79, I spent the whole time in Iditarod, the old town of Iditarod, and I was not very well prepared for it. And it was a real learning experience, and I got a lot out of what it's like to be outside in Alaska that week.
I guess we all do at one time or another, but it looks, you're here, so it turned out okay. Well, I want to thank both of you very much for joining us and giving us this appreciation for the dogs that make it all happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, up next, progress is sometimes in the eye of the beholder. Why this 1980 Iditarod champ says today's dogs would have had a tough time on the trails of yesteryear.
I just want cremation.
Cremation specialist in Alaska.
Can I have a service before cremation?
Our staff is committed to serving your needs.
I just want something basic. The simpler, the better.
Specializing in simple cremations. Whatever your reasons are for choosing cremation, call Cremation Society of Alaska, 277-2777, or in the Valley, 373-8627, and on the web at alaskacremation.com.
Opportunities present themselves every day. Opportunities that move us forward. Opportunities to serve part-time in your community. while continuing full-time careers or education. To help keep our nation safe, at home and around the globe. Explore your opportunities in the Air Force Reserve.
What is health? It's more than a number on the scale. It's in the water we drink and the air we breathe. It's reflected in our jobs, our climate, and our community. Our health is holistic. Our health care should be the same. At ANTHC, we're providing clean water and sanitation around the state. We're working in partnership to make homes safer, healthcare treatment smarter, and fulfill our vision that Alaska Native people are the healthiest people in the world.
With cameras, cell phones, and the internet, it's easier to keep up with the Iditarod, but even harder to imagine a time when the race was young, with not so many eyes to watch this wilderness adventure unfold. But Joe May was there today. He lives in a small cabin near Trapper Creek with his wife and with memories he hopes to keep alive. Joe May likes living away from town. He enjoys the chores and takes pride in his homemade log splitter.
Part of a hot water heater, part of a snow machine, part of an old well pipe.
Joe feels no pressure to conform.
Constant coffee, constant cigarettes, and stress.
That sums up Joe's life as a Marine in Korea and his service in the Merchant Marine Fleet. He finally found his way to Trapper Creek, thanks to a hitchhiker's tip about cheap land in Alaska.
This is my first cabin, Rhonda, and my first dog. I built this cabin with hand tools. I didn't use a chainsaw, I had no machinery, and I did it alone.
Joe worked a 100-mile trap line with a team of 11 dogs, but it was a chance meeting with Dick Mackey that turned him into an accidental racer. Mackey and Joe Reddington were scouting out a trail for a 300-mile Iditarod warm-up race and invited him to join in.
And I said, we got scruffy, hairy little trapline dogs. And he said, come on out. He said, you'll have fun.
Joe surprised himself during that race.
I won it. I won it by 6 hours. I beat Reddington, Mackey. I beat the best of them. The first time I ever took a dog team out on the trail. And I came home from that, my head was like this.
And the next thing he knew, he was running the Iditarod.
If you want to know what exhaustion looks like, that's what exhaustion looks like. It was a different race. It wasn't the same race.
4 out of the last 5 wearing bib number 16.
With less than 8.5 days on the trail, Dallas Seavey set a new record for the Iditarod last year. When Joe May finished his first Iditarod in 1976, it took him more than 19 days, with some mushers out on the trail for a month.
There was something in the race back then that's missing today.
Perhaps it's the hospitality that mushers relied upon.
You'd come up the hill, and there'd be an 8-year-old kid up there on top of the hill, and he's waiting for you. And he'd say, Ma, it's got some fish on the table. I'll take your leaders. And he'd grab the neckline.
The rules have since changed in the interest of fairness, but for Joe May and many of the early mushers, a big part of the adventure, the chance to experience Native culture.
I have a lot of friends up north that I wouldn't have had were it not for the race.
One of Joe's most valued friendships on the trail, Herbie Nayakpuk, a Shishmaref musher who seemed almost like a dog whisperer.
I've never seen anyone who was closer to his dogs than Herbie. This is what the finish line looked like in 1976. That's Angus.
He's beefy looking.
He is fat, all kinds of hair.
Angus was typical of the dogs that ran the Iditarod.
Joey Reddington Jr., a former world champion.
Now check out Joe Reddington Jr.'s team at the start of the 1975 Iditarod. These dogs were not too many generations from those bred to haul heavy loads long distances.
The dogs up there were sifted or sorted out for efficiency and for quality by a no work, no eat ethic.
Even Fur-Rondi sprint dogs had some heft to them.
The first teams, the early teams in the Iditarod were native teams. They came out of the villages. That's where the good dogs were.
Sprint racing's legendary George Atla told Joe his secret.
He said the best sled dogs in Alaska come out of a gene pool of 100 dogs.
From the Yukon and Kayakuk rivers.
This was one of the good ones, Rhonda. This is typical of the dogs back in that era, the good village dogs. And you just don't see them out there anymore. There's a nobility to the dog. There certainly is.
Gladstone, a wheel dog who refused to quit. You can see the stubbornness in his eyes in a portrait painted by Joe's wife, Sandra.
There's some pretty nice-looking dogs there.
Joe had a major role in a recent book about the Iditarod's first 10 years.
There were things that happened back then that will never happen again. The race today doesn't present the possibilities that existed back then.
Joe won the race in 1980.
That team that won the race in 1980 couldn't win the race today. Tough enough, but not quite fast enough. If you would take the winning team from this year's race back to about 1975 and run them through one of those bad trails, he would not finish first.
There you go, boys. It would be an entirely different race for today's breed of dogs who enjoy amenities like better trail maintenance and straw. And as the race changed, so did Joe's life.
This is Sandra. She helped me train the 1982 team.
Joe met Sandra while demonstrating dog mushing in the Netherlands. He proposed marriage the day after they met. When he finished the 1982 Iditarod, Joe sold his team and bought a sailboat so they could travel the world. And now?
Our whole life is in this little cabin.
And just across the way, a stream meanders, a reminder that life keeps moving on. And yet, the magic of the trail is still with us, changing with the times.
Good dog.
Next week, Iditarod 45 will come to a close, so we hope that this show has enhanced your appreciation of the journey both then and now. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.